Good morning, my friends, and welcome to another episode of All Things Writing. I am so completely stoked about this particular show because the month of September, we have an actual show sponsor. Show sponsors keep us on the air by doing things they pay for. The internet or the website that we have to stay up on. Occasionally we have technology that breaks. Occasionally there's technology that we need to upgrade. It happens. I have needs. What can I say? Now, there are other things that have to go to the electronics recycling center. That kind of stuff is what we all have to pay for as a show here. So, what is really, really cool about the show sponsor this month is it happens to also be somebody that was on the show not that long ago. Of course, we're talking about the author of the Lauren K. Mysteries, Dale Kesterson. She's also a Jumpmaster Press author, by the way. And we really want to talk about this next coming book that she's doing. So Lauren K. is coming back to Jumpmaster Press with a mystery that you're not going to believe, by the way. It's amazing. I mean, how do you mix an evening gown with murder? Well, I mean, totally, you can do that. So a little bit more on that later. What's new on All Things Writing? So as you know, or you should know by now anyway, my intent is to move us from just the Strictly podcast platform to the YouTube podcast platform. We're going to do that by the end of the year. Lots of great reasons to do that. Lots of great things that I've done on podcasting, but I think having the ability to do it on YouTube works a little bit better in terms of technology, but also in terms of ease of production. Also, you get to see my bright, smiley face, and face needs to be shaved. But that's a whole nother matter entirely. We won't talk about that anymore. What are we going to talk about? Okay, let's talk about my next guest. He's a returning guest to the show, by the way. He first joined us a little earlier in the year, actually in April, I believe, if I remember correctly. He is part of that Jumpmaster universe, and I loved focusing on there for a while. We had a lot of Jumpmaster Press people on. That was great. He came on and talked about his existing book, Silent Serpent, and that was a lot of fun to have that chat. And it was just very, very cool. So let's give a warm welcome to today's author interview that we're doing, Mr. Eric Dreiling. Welcome, Eric.
Hey, how you doing, Brian?
Very, very good. It's great to have you back on the show, by the way.
Hey, it's great to be back.
Yeah. So for the benefit of the people who may not know you from the last show, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes. Well, as Brian said, my name's Eric Dreiling. I'm an author with Jumpmaster Press, and I'm currently working on the Fractured Timeline series. Book 2 just released, with Book 1 having released 2 years ago. Another summer release, so that's just kind of a happy coincidence how that all plays out. So, well, let's see. Before I was writing, was 5 years in the United States Army. I was a mechanic there, and yeah. And it was through those experiences where I met some of the most unique people I don't think I would meet in any other setting. Yeah. So I decided they'd make, if nobody would believe it before, if I told people about, hey, I met this person or this person is like that, and they wouldn't believe me in a million years. I thought it would make for great fiction anyway, so I decided to include some of those character traits there into some Fractured Timeline characters.
So, and on behalf of all of us guys who were in the Army and we had to rely on our vehicles, thank you very much, I gotta say. Because you know what we are, if the trucks don't work, we're straight leg infantry, and that's just, nobody wants to see me have to actually march anywhere. It's just not a pretty thing. I mean, really. So, actually, you and I have something else in common too, but we'll get to that in a bit. I'm gonna get to that soon. But you were on the show before talking about Silent Serpent. Now we're back talking about that second book in the series, Twilight Hawk. I love it when we can do that kind of thing because everybody gets to see how a series changes and how the characters change over time. So, I mean, what are we going to see in this next book? How is it changing?
Well, the biggest changes are going to be through Dr. Allison Cade. She was one of the main protagonists in Operation Silent Serpent, and she's also another protagonist, one of two actually, in Twilight Hawk. And a lot of that story deals with her having skipped over pretty much 40 years of history. She's in the near future, but she's way behind on all the technological, like scientific advances that she was otherwise known, to be a professional in. So she's having to figure out how to make all this work, and she's got this considerable gap in scientific progress. So it kind of deals with a little bit of her insecurities there, her longing to return home, and pretty much being separated from everybody whom she knew and loved. So it deals a lot with being like isolationist feeling.
Yeah, but it's kind of a funny thought when we know what it's like to be away from family in a sense of space, but a sense of time would be like a whole different dimension. Does she think about that kind of thing?
Actually, there's an entire chapter where it's a very introspective chapter. She has a moment to herself, and she's kind of going over all this. It's her home, but it's not. The 40-year difference, drastic changes. People that she knew, they hadn't seen her in decades, so there's also a little bit of a disconnect. From her point of view, she had just seen them like maybe a day or two prior. Mm-hmm. So the time travel element gave a lot of room to explore those themes. Mm-hmm. Like, how would she respond compared to how would this person respond who has lived life normally, hadn't skipped over all that time, and just hadn't seen her in years. So it deals a lot with trying to find who she is as a person. How can she help resolve the issue? How can, will she ever make it home, or is home just an illusion, or is it just like a fleeting hope?
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. We think of home in terms of our geographic location, but if we were in our houses and we walk out the door and it was 50 years in the future,
right?
I think of that scene in The Martian where at the very end where he's sitting at the house, but it's not his house; it's a reproduction of the house, and it has to be kind of a mind-blowing experience crossing time versus space.
Right. And then the other half of Twilight Hawk actually deals with the second protagonist, Henry Albrecht, but who went by Burke in the first one. And since then, a lot of things have happened to him because he's now stuck in 1995, which is the year that Dr. Cade's originally from. Mm-hmm. So he's stuck in the past, and he is one of the main characters that started this whole revolution that spanned the timeline. And mm-hmm. now he's he's short of being a broken man. He suffered a physical injury in the first book, which plays a big part in the second book. And he tries to push himself beyond his limitations. And the more he does that, the more he actually puts people in danger. So he's not seeing it that way, and everybody else is like, well, hey, every time you go out and you do something, one of our own is either killed or captured. We can't have you running around. So it deals with him. His sense of hopelessness is, well, he was back there to do a mission. Now he can't do that mission, and he's like, what good am I now? What purpose do I serve? So he's trying to find himself as well.
So, without giving away too many spoilers, what really is the arc of the book? Because we kind of danced around it a little bit. I figure,
right? It's a parallel. It's kind of like a Godfather 2 approach. You got the prequel and the sequel, but they're not prequels or sequels. They're just two concurrent stories, running. And Dr. Cade is stuck at Temporal Operations Command in 2032, and she's trying to figure out a way home. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, Burke, having still stayed in 1995 from the first book, he is trying to figure out his new place in the changed timeline. And ultimately, their paths do cross because things he does in the past affect the future, and so their paths will ultimately cross.
So this is the second in the series.
Yes, book 2.
Had you always sort of intended this to be a series type of thing?
Originally, no. When I came up with the original idea for Operation Silent Serpent, it was supposed to be just a one and done. It was supposed to be my foray into time travel to see if I can actually create an engaging and exciting story. And I took a lot of inspiration from 1990s sci-fi, because that is the science fiction that I grew up on. That is the type of science fiction that made me feel excited to pick up a book and read it, or a comic book. And the goal was to take that excitement and try to package it into my own creation. And halfway through, after I signed with Jumpmaster and I got my editing notes back, I realized there was just plenty more story that I hadn't even touched yet. Like, I referenced little things here and there.
Yeah.
So when I got to writing part 2, it was starting to get a little chaotic because it actually followed more people. And I'm like, time travel can make it messy enough. So I kind of have to narrow the field a little bit. Who are the key players in this story, which turned out to be Dr. Cade and Burke.
So we've got the first, second, and the second the second book. Walk us through what is happening to your character between these two books, because there's the end of one and the beginning of the second.
Right. What happens is actually book 2 picks up immediately after first. So if you read books 1 and 2 back to back, it's a seamless transition.
Okay.
And I figured that was the best approach, because with time travel, between installments, if you leave any gaps, then you're going to leave the reader with more questions. And then you got to double back and go, oh, well, I got to figure out what were they doing during this time. And then you just kind of trip over your own 2 feet. So I try to make it as a seamless transition as I could with the time travel element.
So we talk a little bit about this, or you talked a little bit about this. You've got all these different threads that you're pulling on, right? Different time threads. How are you, as an author, keeping that all sort of straight? Because there's various strings. Now, I should say we've got the notorious Odessa Foundation. They are Bond villainesque in a certain sense. They're like, Bond villainesque or Moriarty-esque. They're this big thing out there. How are you keeping all the various strings, because they're connected to different timelines in different places? How are you keeping them all straight?
Meticulously with my Microsoft OneNote app and a cork board hung up in my office. And there were times even when I confuse myself, and it's like, oh, no, wait, because they did this in this chapter. This has to happen in the next chapter. So there are times where even I trip myself up. So then I got to go back and be like, if I'm doing that to myself, what am I going to do to my readers? So I try to not oversimplify it, but I try to bring focus to the key events. And the reader would already know that there are other events in motion. But what I do is I take a look at what's currently which character I'm currently focusing on, because I know that at the end of this chapter, it's going to go back to the Temporal Operations Command side of the story with Dr. Cade and all of the operators. So it's like, okay, I got to keep the stories separate but connected in a way. So what's going on with her, and you don't confuse it to what's going on with Burke. And I think that was one of the greater challenges of writing Twilight Hawk.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I could, I could almost see this, like you've got yarn and pins around the room, but no,
It's like
this
the
is connected.
the YouTube video conspiracy where you see the strings attached to multiple pictures. That's pretty much what goes through my mind when I'm threading these these plot points.
I am, so sometimes when I'm writing like the second novel, sometimes I'll do like a mind map, and I have actually done that to the point where I have so many lines that I have no idea what I'm trying to actually do anymore, and I've got to, like, okay, let's untangle this web. Now, if I were to add a time element to that as well, it's almost like 3D Klingon chess at that point. I'm not sure how I'd keep that all together. I mentioned it earlier. You and I actually share something in common that I don't think I realized when we did our first interview. Maybe I did, maybe I don't remember, but we're both AMU graduates.
Yes.
Yes. So now I know you're all about education. You love education.
Yes, I'm a substitute teacher. Yes.
It's a big part. It's a big part of your life. What role does your own personal education play in your writing style?
My educational background actually plays into more how I map out the stories. You were just talking about using mind maps and other writer tools to help organize and plot points. What I do is I learn to use the organizational skills through my bachelor's and my master's degree programs. And I'll organize every idea that comes to mind, I'll jot it down, and then I'll organize it into like a mind map, like you said. And then I'll figure out, okay, I can weed this out and I can focus on this. It's a way to clear out the clutter.
Yeah.
And with the education, with being a substitute teacher, having my master's of education, reading is actually more important than ever, especially in today's time. You have a lot of these apps out there, Instagram, TikTok, things that are, can easily distract someone. And literacy is one of my greatest passions. And I learned that through my education. So when I'm writing my fractured timeline, I try to infuse that excitement. And I want to give new readers a reason why to pick up that book and go, oh, hey, this sounds kind of cool. And I just want to bring that kind of like awareness to all the readers, about importance of literacy and pretty much how it's all connected, with English and history. It's just everything, so.
Yeah. It is so critically important that people, I personally believe it's so critically important that we go back and we read the things that have come before us, because there's, I was thinking, it was a couple of years ago, I was reading A Portrait of Dorian Gray. And there's a lot of wonderful, subtle lessons that story teaches, that if you just listen to the story or read the story or however you're taking that in, that are important, very, very important. So I love that. I love the fact that it is something that you are, you're doing that. So you said you're working on your master's degree too, right?
Actually, I completed the program. My conferment date was this past February.
Congratulations.
So, thank you. And I'm a substitute teacher. I'm on my way to becoming a licensed teacher. So I'm getting the experience as a sub and then move on to that. So I also take a look at, the people with whom I interact in the classroom, children. So I teach grades from actually kindergarten all the way up to 8th. So there's that wide spectrum, different age groups and children with different interests. And I often tell them when they say, oh, reading's boring, it's like, okay, well, you just haven't found the right book yet. And
absolutely.
And that's what I tell them. And then so I'll go through a list of books that I think will appeal to them. And more often than not, they'll say, that sounds kind of neat. It's like, well, there you go. Well, and if we can find the book, we'll provide it to them and they'll look at, hey, this ain't so bad. So it's just a matter of knowing how to talk to them, and finding the right book.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. So, do you think your experience with the kids, do you take some of that interaction and you're weaving that into the storylines as you're writing them? How do they influence
Um, they help me flesh out the everyman characters, the one where you have the genius, in this case, Dr. Cade, giving them a bunch of techno babble, and you just see their eyes glaze over.
you?
When I'm teaching an English lesson, sometimes I get really into it, and I start. I'll even diagram a sentence, and I
Hmm.
was told, "Hey, we don't do that anymore, Mr. Dry." I'm like, "Wait, you don't diagram sentences?" I'm like, "Oh, there goes half my lesson." So when I see their reactions, it's like, how would that? It's like, how many people can relate to that, just that one moment in everyday
Yeah.
life, and how can I
Yeah.
put it into the book? And so there's this whole scene with Dr. Cade and one of the TOC operators, and he asks a simple question. He's like, I just wish I knew what was going on. So she took it as the science aspect, and he's like, whoa, 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 hold on, stop. I'm going to stop you right there. And that actually happened to me once with a student. I was going off on left field. I'm like, hey, this is how this is connected, and that, and I kept that locked in my mind. So when I sat home and I had my 2 hours to write, it's like, I got to include this somehow. This is just too good to let up. And I think those little moments in these books can also help connect the reader, because they could sit there while they're reading, go, you know what? I understand. I get what he's saying.
Mhm.
I'd be the same way. I'd react the exact same way.
Yeah.
So that is kind of what I go for
Mhm.
when I'm, writing these, tightly connected stories.
Well, it goes back to the idea of being authentic and real when you write.
Yes. And in many ways, authentic dialogue can actually be its own challenge, because
Hmm.
you know what you want, but then you're so worried that it's going to come across as forced or fake. So then you overthink the process. And when your editor gets it, they go, no, we just scratch this. And that happened a lot. Kyle Hanna, he's our
I,
editor,
I was about to say,
and he got my notes.
I could see Kyle putting notes on the side. What, what
Oh,
in
yeah.
the world are you?
Great guy, Kyle Hanna, great guy, excellent editor. He, in one of the one of the copies I got back, there's this, on the right hand side, there's a footnote. There's this long section. It was just for one paragraph. I'm like, oh my god, it's going to take longer to read the notes than it
And
is
it
its
is the
own
fixed. Yeah.
paragraph. Yeah, but
Yeah.
I understood what he was saying. It was kind of, you got to let the dialogue flow.
Yeah.
Include the verbal pauses. Maybe somebody has more verbal pauses than others. Perhaps people are meticulous on the words they use, where others just say whatever comes to mind, which may not always make sense upon first, hearing. So
Hmm.
it's that's my rule of thumb, to keep that, in mind when writing dialogue. And some characters, and you'll probably know this too, some characters just, you don't even think about write. You just sit down and you just
Yeah.
write their dialogue. It's a no brainer. And others,
Yeah.
it slams the brakes on that process. And you
Yeah.
go, okay, now hold on. How would they respond? And it just creates this, like, almost like a writer's block. I don't know if that's what the term I want to use, but that's the closest I can come to that.
I think it's kind of one of those situations where you know the dialogue's there, you know the
Mm-hmm.
personality's there, you just don't know how to speak for them.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. And
And I have
once you figure
quite a
that
few.
part out, yeah.
Yes, I actually have a coffee mug sitting on my desk, and it says "Writer's Block: When your imaginary friends stop talking to you."
uh, I hate it when that happens. And then they leave me alone on the playground, and oh boy, it's
And they
not
wait till
pretty.
you're
It's not
they
pretty.
wait till you're trying to go to sleep. Hey, I got an idea. Come on, let's
Yeah.
go.
Yeah. That's normally what happens. You start to fall asleep and you're like, oh, that's what that meant. I've
Yep.
gotten up more than once and run downstairs because I had to write
I've
something down.
I actually took another bit of advice that Kyle gave me. He said, when you have those moments that it wakes you out of a sound sleep, and
Mm-hmm.
it's just an idea you don't want to lose, always have a writing pad or a journal or something that you can capture the idea right then and there. So I have one by next to my bed. Then I have one coffee table downstairs.
Mm-hmm.
So if an idea pops into my head, I have to write it down.
Yeah, yeah. I actually have to go downstairs because if I woke up and turned on a light to write something, I'm pretty sure I'd get hit in the head by my wife. What are you doing? I can't. I gotta write that down.
Exactly. Well, I try to avoid. I use the flashlight on my cell phone, but sometimes that gets too bright, especially the iPhones. You know how bright those lights are.
Yes.
In a dark room and oh my god! I had to get that. I apologized profusely, and then I put the idea down, and then I went back to sleep.
Well, and then the dog gives me a dirty look, and oh man.
See, with me, it's the cat. The cat will just glare at me, silently judging.
You're like, why are you awake? What is the matter with you, human?
Why are you awake? And more importantly, why aren't you feeding me right now?
Well, yeah, cats are very much driven. Dogs are very much so. Yeah.
Even though their dish is full, they'll still look at you like you're not paying attention to me. So it's.
Oh well, pets are wonderful things.
Yeah. They are.
So now I'm going to ask what's next for you, or I guess the question is probably better posed. What is next for Dr. Allison Cade? Is there more to her story?
Oh, there is plenty more. Part 2, obviously, I can't give away any spoilers, but part 2 just has that ending to it. And I'm currently working on book 3, which is titled Viper's Den.
Mm-hmm. Viper's Den. I love it.
Viper's Den, yes. And the original title for it, before I made the change, was actually Wolf Slayer.
Mm. Slayer?
Wolf's Lair.
Wolf Slayer, okay.
Yeah, it was a reference to Hitler's bunker in World War II, right before the end of the war.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say I'm doing research, active, full-fledged research on that one scene because it does play a huge part in the next story, and that's not giving anything away for Twilight Hawk or even for Silent Serpent for those who may not have read it yet. But I love taking actual historical events and weaving them into the story to make it fit. Not just hey, time travel reference here. Look at this. It's more of a, this is why this is important. This is why the characters need to pay attention to this. And so each writing project, I'll say this right now, each writing project is not only its own adventure, but it's its own process. You're not going to use the same process that necessarily that you did for the last book on your current project. Because the story might dictate that you got to present it in a different style, or a character that you didn't really consider much before is demanding to take center stage. And so you kind of have to, as writers, we got to stay on our feet and go okay, I have an idea, but this process worked great for book 1, but not for book 2 or even 3. So it's a matter of adapting, learning new writing skills. Yes.
That is very true. I was just thinking about, I did a rewrite on one of my books, and then I'm working on the last book in the series, and those two are fundamentally very different books. Just from a structural standpoint, they're just a different kind of animal. So knowing which way to deal with them, I think, is really important. Yeah.
Right. And I thought writing in the beginning, I'll just say this, I thought writing was not a one size fits all, but I thought if I have 1 or 2 styles, that's all I need. I'll tell you, when I started Twilight Hawk, I was sitting there scratching my head. It's I got the ideas on notebooks and on my iPhone, but the writing style that I use for Operation Silent Serpent just doesn't work, because book 1 is a straightforward action story. Book 2 is more introspective, and you can't write an introspective story like somebody's charging through the front door.
Yeah, no.
So it's a matter of okay, you really got to spend time with the characters. You got to get into their heads, and the book 3 is no different. In fact, it's there's so much going on because of the first 2.
So
yes,
with an introspective book, though, there's a lot of inner monologue, right?
Yes, a lot of thoughts. Now I don't drown out the page and just thought after thought.
Mm-hmm.
It's I try to
you
communicate.
have to work in that dialogue aspect. So how are you managing all that?
Well, one scene, there's a character speaking to themselves, just thinking out loud. Also, I try to communicate a lot of this through body language, like they're sitting down, maybe they're fidgeting with something, or they have a nervous tic, or they don't sit there and just speak to a photo of somebody. But I try to get them moving around the room, just things that a lot of us might do when we're alone and we're restless, and our minds are running a mile a minute. We just don't sit there and stare off into space, because honestly, reading that is not fun. You lose your audience. It's okay. Well, what if somebody's trying to call and you got the phone ringing, but they're locked in their own mind, and you play with those elements. And then it's also knowing when to break from that, how much time to spend on those scenes before you go, okay, now I need to keep the scene going. I need to keep the plot moving. It's just enough introspection to get the reader to identify. Maybe they can disagree with how they're doing it, or maybe they agree. But as soon as you capture that, you move on and you continue the story.
Cool. Oh, interesting. Well, the most important question I ever ask on all things writing: where can people find your work? Of course, we already kind of mentioned it. Jumpmasterpress.com.
Exactly. Each author has their own page. You go to jumpmasterpress.com. They actually updated their page and make finding books even easier. You just go to jumpmasterpress.com. They got a little search bar. You type in Operation Silent Serpent or Twilight Hawk, and it'll take you directly.
Eric Dreiling.
Yes, it'll take you to the author page where it has all the books connected. And as a matter of fact, Gene Rowley just put out a box set of the first 2 books. So you don't have to buy them individually. You can buy the first 2 adventures in a box set.
Very cool. Very cool. Well,
I love that box set.
Yeah, someday I'm going to be very impressive and be one of Jumpmaster Press's authors. However, mostly just because I really want to see the box set come out of something I'm working on. Just because I think it'd be cool.
It's beautiful. Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, with mine, the artwork they took on the top of the box, it says Fractured Timeline. On one side, you have the cover art for Operation Silent Serpent, and on the other side, it's Twilight Hawk. But the way he blended the colors of the 2 covers, it's just like a seamless transition, and it is absolutely beautiful.
That's cool. That's cool. Yeah, I think as authors sometimes we geek out about cover art.
Yeah, that's its own world within writing. Like you can write the story, and when you get to that point where you're sitting down with the cover artist and go, okay, let's go over some ideas. You're like, I have so many ideas. Like I did that with Gene. Oh, I drove that man crazy. When I was writing Twilight Hawk,
all the things.
I had like so many ideas, and he's like, well, hold on. We only have about 3 seconds to capture a reader's attention when they're looking at that book, cover to cover. So we have to find something that just summarizes your entire story, like the image, and it's like, but it's still exciting though. It's just another form of creative expression.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Eric, I love having repeat offenders on all things writing. So thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
It's always great to be here.
Well, and whenever we get that 3rd book ready, or whenever you want to come on for that matter, heck, I just love having you're a lot of fun because you have all these different assets that you're bringing to your writing career that I think are important to talk about. I love the education part, the literacy part, all that stuff is really important to me.
Right. And literacy, like I said, I was always concerned about it before I became a substitute teacher, but it wasn't until I was actually in the classroom and seeing firsthand how the pandemic affected schools and how far, unfortunately, a lot of children fell in their education. It's more of a passion, a desire, if you will, to sit down and be like, hey, here's how you can use science fiction even to get them interested in actual, like science. Like if they think science is boring, you talk a little bit about this and that, and you connect the ideas. So I try to do that as often as I can. I mean, the opportunity doesn't always present itself, but when it does, I jump on it, and I try to get the kids excited to want to learn.
Well, thank you for doing that, because we need more readers in this world. It's important.
Yes. There's nothing quite like having a book in your hand. Kindles are cool. I own a few, but nothing will ever beat holding that physical book in your hand. It's just
I have bookshelves all over this room, and they're full. They're full. They get more full by the day. But I've actually, I only hang on to signed copies anymore of different things. There are a few rare exceptions. The Ultimate Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy being one of them.
Yes.
But you've got to
excellent
have that
book, by the way. Excellent.
It is. Yeah, oh, it is, absolutely.
I got to revisit some of those books. Man.
Well, so the Ultimate, as just an aside, the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy influenced me to write the Begorian Chronicles, and the Begorian Chronicles is actually dedicated to Douglas Adams, because he pushed me in a way that I don't think anybody else could have at the time when I read it.
Right, and I was going to tell you, because you just reminded me that like specific inspirational sources. I mentioned in our first interview that Time Cop, the Jean-Claude Van Damme movie, greatly influenced Operation Silent Serpent. Mm-hmm. Well, I drew from another one of my 1990s inspirations, which was Stargate SG-1.
Yeah,
absolutely love that show, and I drew a lot of inspiration, like what made their characters so interesting? Why did people want to follow them? And then it's like, why did I follow them? I started with that question. Well, why did I follow them? Mm-hmm. If I'm the one writing my story, why did I follow these characters? Yeah. So I draw from that, and then I go ahead and make the story happen. But definitely those.
Yeah, definitely. You find you find somebody that you either watch or read about, and it's escaping me. The books that take place in the Moscow subway system. Glukovsky. Anyway, Russian author, who's currently an enemy of the state because he heaps a good old dose of criticism on the Russian government. But he wrote a series of books that became a video game. And through the video game, my son, who, had never passed a book he would ignore, actually read all the novels. And the novels are thick novels, too.
Oh, I know. What is that? It's around the tip of my tongue. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Playing the games made me want to go back and read the source material.
Yeah, it's a good game, by the way.
Yeah, it was something. It'll pop up hours later, but
middle of the night we'll both remind it, or somebody will post it in the comments section of this and say, "Oh yeah, that was blah blah blah." Anyway, it's okay, whatever.
Yes.
Well, dear listeners, if you remember what the name of that is, please put it in the comment section. We would appreciate it, because our brains are full. We can't remember. That's okay. Now, another thing I want to remind you, dear listeners, is please hit that subscribe button or follow button or whatever button you happen to have in front of you. And if you have not had a chance to check me out on Patreon, please do so. It's very, very important to me. It's a way to keep the show going and on the air and keep everybody happy. Nobody wants me out begging on street corners, which is what's going to happen. If you like what I'm doing, you can also send me a tip by going through Buy Me a Coffee or whatever. The tips are always appreciated. Patreon as well. Let's see. Today's show. Oh, by the way, so your fellow author, by the way, Dale Kesterson, is the wonderful supporter. She supported this month. Her Lauren K. Mystery Series, they're available at the Jumpmaster website as well. You can just type in her name, Dale Kesterson, Kesterson, And you'll find her there at Jumpmaster Press. I will leave a link to Jumpmaster Press in the show notes for those of you. Her next book is Murderous Intentions. It's going to be out in 2024. It follows her protagonist, Lauren Kay, into the next mystery. She's going to be going on a date of sorts. And of course, anywhere Lauren Kay goes, apparently somebody dies. So it may be well worth checking out. Now, if you want to know more about the series, I highly suggest all of you listening to the sound of my voice go to Jumpmaster Press and check out the first 2 books. The first 2 are Resort to Murder and Staged for Death. You can also find her collection of short stories, Dreams of Time and Space. Eric, we were talking about time and space. Dreams of Time and Space. It's a charity anthology of her stories. So that's kind of amazing. Once again, Eric, thank you so much for joining me. I'm sure not the last time we'll have you on the show.
I'll definitely be back. You can count on that. It's always great to be here.
I love repeat offenders. They're so much fun. So until next time, this is Brian the Writer telling you to get out and write your little hearts out, please, because that is really what the show is about, encouraging people to write. On behalf of myself and my special guest today, Mr. Eric Dreiling, this is All Things Writing signing out.